We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. This week, the comedian Jack D claimed the British are losing their famous sense of irony over Brexit. Well, in that case, I think Brexit is a great idea. On the show this week, Greg says the Prime Minister doesn't earn enough. And no, he is not being ironic. Nick wants to argue that compassion doesn't see colour. Rachel says there's nothing Christian about stopping boys wearing dresses. And June says she has a girl crush. But first, it's me, Snoop Mogg, the Mogg father, Mogmentum, the honourable member for the 19th century. I can only be talking about Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Tory MP for North East Somerset, a man with whom large parts of the country are, if we're to believe The Sun, completely smitten. And thanks to Rachel, last week's Straight Talker of the Week.
Even though every fibre of my being passionately disagrees with him, I'd like to award it to Flavour of the Month MP Jacob Rees-Mogg for his bravery on Good Morning Britain.
Among the oh-so-lovable views of the man who appears to have been born in a pinstripe suit and a copy of the Financial Times in his hand are opposition to same-sex marriage, abortion and changing his own children's nappies. How adorable. In a world in which the rights of gay people, women and oppressed minorities in general were absolutely guaranteed, I too might be able to laugh at the nostalgic idiosyncrasy of Jacob Rees-Mogg and applaud his courage in saying how he truly feels. But I live in a world where women are still paid less at work and change the nappies at home and still have to fight for control of their own bodies, where gay people still get attacked in the streets, where a proud misogynist is in the White House and a trans woman who has the audacity to voice her views is not regarded with affectionate interest but made a pariah. I'm not saying I can tell Jacob Rees-Mogg what to believe. I hear what he does, and I'm definitely not laughing.
Afua, yes, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you say, but Jacob is becoming a cult figure, not because of what he says, but sort of how he says it.
Yeah.
It's a style over substance, and actually what he said last week on another TV show, not nearly as good as this one, was actually extremely, in a sense, offensive. So,
and you said at the time last week you didn't agree with any of it.
However, let's first, before I launch into how offensive it was, can we just see what Jacob Rees-Mogg said in response to being awarded our gong? What the Mogster says is, I'm honoured to have been given the Straight Talker of the Week award by Sky News The Pledge. As the panel disagreed with my views, I admire and am grateful for their commitment to free speech. OK, can we just break down what he actually said? He said that marriage was a sacrament and had nothing to do with Parliament, and that he was opposed to abortion on all grounds, whether it be the product of rape or whether the conception be the product of rape or incest. Now, he is entitled, even Tories are entitled to their views and to their religious beliefs. But what he said was drastically wrong and in opposition to what most of the country and even his Catholic faith believes. And also went against three of the most progressive acts we have seen pass through Parliament since 1967. The Abortion Act, the Homosexuality, the Legalisation of Homosexuality Act, both in 1967. And indeed, Cameron, his former Prime Minister's proudest hour, which was the institution of same-sex marriage. So the Mogster is completely at odds with most of the country, his own party and his religion.
I think what I'm getting, what's kind
of... I'm agreeing with you.
I know. We agree a lot on this. And I think when listening to you, I think it's helping me crystallise what's bothering me here, which is not what he actually believes so much, because, as you all know, I'm completely committed to free speech. It's more that so many people seem so impressed by it.
How
You know,
are you
that
committed
people
to
are
free
so
speech?
willing to be... What do you mean, how am I committed to
You're
free speech?
censoring... I mean,
I'm
I've
not
never
censoring
heard
anyone.
such po-faced twaddle as I heard from you. If we are to believe what you just said in your introduction, you think he's opposed to gay rights, do you? Opposed to gay people, I'm sorry. He has no problem with homosexuals, because I've actually interviewed him at length about this.
Some of his best friends homosexuals, Nick.
You seem to... Sorry?
Are some of his best friends homosexuals?
No idea, does it matter?
Probably.
Or can
Well,
you
it
only-
sort of does, actually.
What,
'cause
you, can
it's-
only, you also seem to hold him responsible for President Trump's arriving.
I didn't hold him responsible. Don't exaggerate.
You have a right in this country, thank God, to say what you feel.
Did
As
you
long as
hear
you're
what
not
I
trying-
said?
Hold on. As long as you're not trying to, as long as I'm not trying to incite violence, as long as I don't insult your mother or your child, I can pretty much say what I choose. And thank God we live in this country. And the fact that you don't agree with it, great. It doesn't matter. We should have people able to say these things. Otherwise, you will just have groupthink. And one last thing, and I don't agree with what you said on the TV about. Of course, I don't agree about rape and abortion. But let's just refer to what a man of the cloth says. This is Bishop Mark Davis, who says, I think we should all be grateful for the integrity of politicians like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who fearlessly speak of those Christian convictions on which our society was built. Lastly, he totally respects the fact that you don't agree with a single word he says, and he applauds the fact that you say that. Why can't you say the same about him? That is what it's about.
Did
Stop
you hear
censoring.
what I said? I can't tell him what to think. I respect.
Well, why are you
people's-
having a go at him?
No, I'm not. This is what I just said.
You said,
I'm not,
I can't
I'm
find
not,
it funny.
I'm,
Oh,
I
it's
don't.
not
I
funny.
don't. Well, you can't
Why
tell
are
me
you
what
so
to
po-
find.
But why be so
Well, how,
po-faced?
so now you can tell me what to find funny.
Just let it slip past.
Should we,
So wait a minute.
should we join in?
Yeah, join in. Please tell me what.
I mean, what is weird about it is that he's on almost every show all the time at the moment. And that's what's weird about it. That, I mean, he's quite clearly, you know, from out there somewhere. He's a sort of... And I have no problem with what he says. I don't agree with him on anything, I don't think.
I actually do have a problem with what he said.
Well, you wouldn't, but people are entitled to have a view.
Yeah, people are entitled to have.
What I worry about is that if his view is on, if he is on so many shows, so many times, and he's now just pulled in.
No. That's not
You know
the
what I
worrying
find
thing.
interesting, actually? You know, there was a report, I think it was last year, that said that a certain percentage of Muslims were opposed to same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
And that caused outrage. And you know what the headlines was? Problem with our Muslim communities, you know, a need to teach them about fundamental British values. But when Jacob Rees-Mogg comes out in his tweed and his pinstripe and says everyone thinks it's delightfully charming, he's now the lead contender, according to some polls, to be the next Tory leader.
Well,
this isn't like some fringe figure.
But let's just all pray that he does become the next Tory leader. Because if he becomes the next Tory leader, as I said last week, you will never get a Conservative government again.
But I still think we're slightly scooting away from the thing that I thought was really dangerous and possibly pernicious about Jacob Rees-Mogg's statement, which takes us a bit back to Trump, which is in America you have abortion clinics being bombed because of people who are so profoundly against abortion. If you have Jacob Rees-Mogg being lionised in every single TV studio for his views and the way he expresses them, this could lead to a sense that what he says is correct and that women who seek abortion are wrong in any circumstance.
And it's also being portrayed as quite... I mean, you bring him into it, but it's also being portrayed as quite harmless, you know, as kind of amusing and fun. This is women's lives that we're talking about.
Yeah, well, you know, for me with Jacob Rees-Mogg, I have no problem with him having his views. Where I have a problem is if somebody like that did become leader of the Conservative Party and they hold those sorts of views and they're in a position to influence policy, that's when I have a serious problem. Well, it could happen. It could happen. And I think he does. He wouldn't be doing all the press he's doing. He's not doing it for the fun of it.
He's being a lot more strategic than people like to give him credit for.
Come on, Nick.
Starting an Instagram account. They didn't have Instagram accounts in the 90s.
This is a discussion we could have had about the current leader of the Labour Party
and the current president.
3 years ago.
And the current president.
We're in
the midst of unforeseen events.
But he didn't want to be leader of the Labour Party.
It's true, yeah. And look,
if he sought to lead the party,
which I'm sure he will at some point,
or in the country, he wouldn't have said what he said on that television interview.
That's not true. Look at what Trump's been able to get away with.
This is a man who is genuinely persuaded by his Christian beliefs. And we should accept and applaud that. Now, if we don't agree with it, and I don't agree with what he said, but I accept his faith.
But hang on. They're not just... I mean, if you actually look at the figures now, the majority of Roman Catholics disagree with him.
I'm Christian. I disagree with him.
OK, good.
So, hello, those not necessarily Christian beliefs.
There's no way... If he actually sought high office, do you really think he'd say that?
Well,
he's nothing if not a
Donald
bright
Trump
man.
was able to say
Never mind,
he
stop with the
grabbed
Trump.
women by
Just-
the...
no,
and was able to get into the highest
Nick, I
office
feel
of the
you're
land.
not engaging with the issue here. You're putting it back onto his views and acting as if I'm trying to police his views, which I'm not. I've told you I'm not. You can continue asking
You are being
me.
po-faced.
I'm not. I am not the
can't
thought
find this
police.
a laughing matter.
I believe in freedom
my
of speech
God.
and thought and conscience, so I am not trying to police what he thinks. The issue I have is with the reaction people are having to what he thinks, that people think it's harmless and charming and potentially electable. So what do you say about that?
I've said to you already, I applaud the fact that we have free speech.
So do we all.
That's not what I'm asking you.
We all do.
I know this is a double negative. I know this is a double negative, which you should never say nor write. But we don't have a right not to be offended. Sometimes
I don't
people
mind
will
being
say,
offended.
sometimes
I sit next to you every week. I'm OK with being
some
offended.
people will say things that you find offensive.
And
right?
that's
is and that is just what you accept in the West.
Totally.
Because the other way around is that you have a board that says, no, you're not allowed to say this about abortion, you're not allowed to say that. And I welcome the fact that sometimes I'm offended and I offend other people. That's what we're here to do.
We
But what
agree
is
with you on
interesting, Nick,
that.
is that 25% of Conservative members put him at the top of the person they would like to win. And he's you know, three times as head of your brother now. Your brother's about 6%. He's at 25%. And what it tells you about a chunk of the Conservative Party.
No, they like straight talkers.
Well,
they like straight talkers.
It's possibly they
And
like straight
authentic
talkers. Actually, or they like people who come from the 19th century.
I wonder whether he would enjoy the same level, as and when the comments about abortion are disseminated more broadly. I wonder if he'll enjoy the same level of support. But people like the reason that, and they've all been through my studio. Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, Alex Salmond. Now, whether you like them as individuals, the reason that they engage...
You choose interesting friends, don't you, Nick?
They come through the street. Yeah, OK, yeah, with the exception of one. They engage because they tell the truth.
Do you draw a line somewhere that people who have deeply held views about things that we consider to be abhorrent? Do you still applaud? I mean, is there any view that you don't applaud?
What do you mean?
So, for example, people who don't believe that women are equal to men.
That's
There are
ridiculous.
people who believe
But
that. In fact, in America, that movement's gaining.
Yeah, but they're
gaining
entitled
ground.
They
to
are
their false
entitled to
views.
their view.
But they're just ridiculous.
I'm not. There's nobody who's not entitled to believe what they believe. But do you draw a line where you say it's dangerous to have these kind of views being applauded in politics?
No, I think it's better to air them because then you can see how vacant they are.
I agree with Nick on that.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah,
well, on a
let's
point of
debate
accord, we move on. And I want to start with you all with a question. Did you know if you're white, you're probably going to struggle to provide help to those in need after a major disaster? Who knew, eh? Well, that's the conclusion from comments made by the Chief Executive of the British Red Cross, Mike Adamson, commenting on how his charity struggled with the Grenfell disaster because its workforce is too white. Quotes, "There is no escaping the fact that with shining exceptions, such as our refugee services, we are nowhere near as diverse as we need to be," he said. And he went on, quotes, "There is a risk that in a very diverse community like Grenfell, an organisation with the words British and Cross in its title is confused with a Christian establishment organisation," close quotes. Pretty frightening, therefore, that it falls to me to tell the boss that his organisation was actually set up in Switzerland and the cross was the reverse of the Swiss flag. Nothing to do with the church. If he wasn't such a well-meaning Wally, this man could get you really quite cross.
Oh, Nick. You really
Oh, joy, it's you starting,
you
is it?
really don't get it. Hi. You have a right. You have a right to be offended, Nick.
Yes.
You don't get it. You just don't get it.
What did I get?
This is about perception. I don't know if you know this, but I used to be a lawyer.
Yes, I did know that.
And in law, when you bring a claim for bias, the test that judges use is not whether there is actual bias, but whether there is a perception of bias, whether there is a real possibility of a perception of bias. And in these kinds of situations, it's perception that is everything. Now, I think, and actually it's a real shame because I saw the headlines about this, which were kind of Red Cross too white to deal with Grenfell. And when I read his actual article, I thought it was a real shame. It was much more nuanced and reflective than that. He runs this organisation. He knows what they went through on the ground trying to reach this community. He felt this problem of distrust. The reason that exists is because the people in Grenfell felt that they are not reflected, that they don't have a voice, that they're not represented. Now, you can't tell people, as you've just been lecturing me, how to feel. That is how they feel. And you say that compassion doesn't see colour. Well, what about poverty? Because 50% of people from African backgrounds live in poverty. People from BME backgrounds are twice as likely to be in poverty as white people. Social housing, the kind of people who live in the situation in which Grenfell is possible, are more likely...
Off topic,
No,
really.
it's not off topic. The residents of Grenfell Tower had a sense that they're overrepresented in this kind of community, that they're more likely to suffer this kind of horror, and that is why they have a perception of distrust.
Well, coming back to your legal background, may it please the court, I have a withering put down, but I could see June getting quite excised as I introduced this conversation.
I don't...
He's waving at me at one point.
He doesn't even mention race in his statement.
Well, he says... Well, I don't need to read the quote out again. He says that in a diverse community...
Yeah,
and that's why they struggled at Grenfell.
But I think to make the assumption that he only means too white is... I don't get where the papers are going with that, because his comment was really based on religion, and as you say, he's wrong in what he was saying in that.
He's wrong, which is pretty frightening, actually.
So I don't understand why the press made that assumption.
Well, you called him a wally. Now, I think you're being deeply unfair there, because he didn't have to write this at all.
Yeah.
He's written it because he runs an organisation and he sees an issue. And it seems to me it's very brave of him to actually write it. It'd be much easier not to say anything and say, yes, didn't we do a great job? What he actually said was, look, some of this community didn't trust us. They didn't think we were there for them. Now, if he believes that, and if his people are telling him that, it is an issue. What the solution is more difficult, but, I mean, it must be an issue, and I commend him for what he wrote.
Well, of course, you got involved in a heck of a row when you were at the BBC.
At the
It was about
BBC.
over 10 years ago, wasn't it? You said the BBC
was hideously white. Isn't that what you
16
said?
years ago.
I said the BBC was hideously white.
Yeah.
So is it hideous to be white, then?
No, the point was, what I was trying to... Actually, a lot of people thought I would get in a row. Actually, it was one of the best things I said when I was there, because actually it told the staff at the BBC I was serious about changing the racial mix of the BBC. And the truth was, you would go to... In those days, at the BBC, when we looked at places like Birmingham and Leeds and the rest of it, actually, there were virtually no people from ethnic minorities at all. And what we did was we said, we're going to change this. And actually, in 4 years, we had a significant change, because we said, this is the policy. And what we did was we were hated by certain sections of the press for doing it. What we put in place was saying, look, we're just not going to employ only white people in the future. This has got to change. We need to bring
Rachel. There is a risk that in a very diverse community like Grenfell, Rachel, you live virtually next door, an organisation with the words British and cross in its title is confused with a Christian establishment organisation. If you're an Ethiopian and you've struggled down 16 floors and all your possessions have been burnt and someone's offering you a bottle of water and a blanket, do you care whether they're white, black or any shade in between?
Of course not. And I think we've dealt with the British Red Cross having a problem at Grenfell. I'd like to broaden this out, because I think your debate actually opens up a bigger issue. And though I'm hideously white myself, it's about the people we put in positions of authority and judgment to look into things, or even to do jobs, as we talked about Theresa May last week. And the issue is, do these people have to reflect the constituency they are purporting to represent? And obviously in Parliament we don't have it exactly right. In boardrooms we don't have it exactly right. There are very few women in boardrooms. But I really think that sometimes you are never going to get it perfectly right. And what really distresses me, and I know that the judge who's actually leading the inquiry, Sir Martin Mulbuck, is setting out his stall this week. And see, I caught a bit of it, and I think he's doing an extremely good job. And when it comes to really highly politicised disasters or tragedies that we've seen in June with Grenfell, I think even if you had Kofi Annan, Nelson Mandela, Princess Diana and Mother Teresa sitting on the panel, people would still say it wasn't right and that, they were not the right people to do the job. So what I'd like to finish in saying is, British Red Cross is there to do a job. Let it get on with the job. We appoint people to do jobs. Please let them get on with it. Otherwise, what we do is we get distracted in this endless echo chamber of, are they the right people? It's all about leadership challenges and, whether they're the right personnel, and nothing ever gets done. So I beg everyone just to let people get on with their jobs.
The only thing I would add to that, Rachel, is all of the research, all of the data shows that when you have a diverse workforce, when you have a diverse group dealing with an issue, you get better results.
Of course.
And I think with a community like Grenfell, it would be absolutely insane to not have a diverse group put to actually help deal and solve this issue. So I get your point. But I do think that we need to make sure that we've got...
look at the child abuse one. You hadn't... No, it never happened for years because people kept saying it was the wrong judge in charge.
You can't compare this with that. I think we need to make sure we have a broad perspective of people and people who actually do understand what it feels like for the residents of Grenfell.
I mean, June's an expert on diversity. She's just written a book about the benefits of having diverse
I'm all for
diversity. I think, Rachel...
I think our show shows
what I feel like you're missing... I hear what you're saying, but what I think you're missing is, for me, this is where we get opportunities to improve. It's when things hit rock bottom. It's when you get the death of Stephen Lawrence that the police then take a serious look at the need to recruit black officers. The charity sector is very white. The legal sector is very white. The judiciary is almost completely white. These are long-running problems.
Just to add, it's not that it's just white. It's also
elitist
too.
It's a class
so for me,
issue.
diversity is across the board.
But in the end, what we should...
White isn't the issue.
We should judge the result of the inquiry on basically what it says.
But this is where perception comes in.
Well, perception
Because I'm not saying that this judge, for example, can't do a good job.
Yes, but a lot of people are saying he can't do it because he's a white upper-class male.
He's never lived in a council.
And he's never lived in a council.
It's their perception that they don't see themselves reflected in any of the institutions which control their lives, so they don't feel represented. And I think in a democracy we should be able to understand why you should be able to feel represented in the institutions.
When you go for an act of some... surgery. Would you insist that the surgeon was from a Ghanaian background as well to reflect your own ethnicity?
But I think if the medical profession didn't have any black people or any women, I would feel a lack of confidence in the fact that all these decisions about my body are being made by old men.
I know I have to yield. I just want to say, I just think for all the white people who did turn out and worked all those nights and all those days, it's a little unfair.
I don't think that's what he was saying.
And
if you read what he wrote.
OK, so it's my turn next. And pledge, all hail Gina Miller. We have a real political heroine in town. Gina Miller is officially my new girl crush. Sorry, Rachel, you've got some competition. This week, the businesswoman turned anti-Brexit campaigner successfully challenged the government's £1 billion deal with the DUP, prompting the government to say there will be a parliamentary vote to approve it. Miss Miller has been criticised harshly as a London elitist opposing the democratic will of the people. I see her as an example of a private citizen acting on the gift of democracy bequeathed to us by heroes of history who have won us the right and responsibility to challenge our government. Now, for most of us, buying votes sounds a little bit dodgy. So what we do is we exercise our right to free speech down the pub or scream at the TV proclaiming politics is a sham. But this lady doesn't just complain, she makes a claim. Yes, she's an individual with the means to fund legal action, but she still serves as an example to all campaigners using whatever means at their disposal to challenge the government. And based on her success to date, in my book, Gina Miller represents the people's opposition. Let's be more like Gina Miller, I say.
Panel.
Yes.
Prepare yourself for shock.
What? Oh, OK, where are we going?
I've had a complete volte-face for Gina Miller. I'm a fully signed-up member.
I feel cheated.
Get Nursey for Afua.
No, we need a round of applause for this, please.
I have to say...
What's going on? Are you drinking? Is that vodka?
Yes, that's right, neat vodka. You talked about the democratic will of the... It is worth remembering that the people, 52% of whom, and she chose to try and derail. But having said that, I think I do have an anarchic streak. And I think the fact that clearly what she did as regards the Brexit vote got legal ground and was considered, and it should be.
And it should be.
And I rather like the idea, as you said, that we live in a country, and the callers to my show are furious with me about this.
Are they
that in this week I've completely changed my position.
Wow.
I quite like the fact that one woman, clearly very committed, clearly very bright, and also, God bless her with a few quid, good luck to her, good luck to her, can actually stop the whole process of what, should we put politely, was a rather shoddy deal.
It was fun,
I'm signed up.
I'm signed up.
I mean, if she hadn't started straight after the referendum, so that she upset those of you who voted. Yeah. She hadn't done that. Actually, she'd have been on your side from the beginning because she's basically a libertarian. She's basically saying, let's define what is the job of government. Yeah. It's not really Parliament, it's government. Let's decide what's the job of government, let's decide what's the job of Parliament, and let's decide that they can't go beyond those powers. Yeah. That's all she's saying, it seems to me, on everything. And I agree with her entirely. I mean, I look at myself as I've got old and I thought, I'm this rather strange sort of person who's a bit left-wing but also a libertarian. I don't want government telling me what I can do and what I can't do.
With no checks and balances.
With no checks and balances. And that's what she's fighting for. So I think we should all join her party.
Trouble is, it won't get anywhere. The deal, she'll force a vote, which is great. Yeah. But she has sort of held them to account, hasn't she?
Yeah, exactly.
She has. What she appears to be much better at doing than our MP, our legislature is seeing where you could drive a coach and horses through current legislation. And she spotted that actually Theresa May was not entitled to trigger Article 50 without a vote in Parliament. Thank goodness. Obviously, the vote in Parliament was a foregone conclusion, sadly. She has also seen that you can't hand £1 billion to keep yourself in government to the Northern Irish party. By the way, which seems to the DUP, which seems to be rather a poor investment, as now the DUP are voting against her when it comes to public sector pay and voting with the Labour Party.
What's going on?
I presume they haven't got the £1 billion yet.
Well,
Not yet.
It hasn't come through
yet. It's got to go through Parliament.
I think we've got quite a proud history of individuals being able to hold the government to account. I mean, that's how separation of powers is meant to work. That's why we have an independent judiciary. I think it is healthy, but the only concern I have is that I think it is a lot for one person to carry. I mean, I know she's not literally on her own, but my worry is it becomes too easy for the opponents of her legal actions to kind of demonise her, and she becomes the personification of, in their view, this kind of blob that wants to prevent Brexit. I mean, the abuse that she got after the Article 50 case was terrifying, and it did make me think, is it sustainable for one person to become the face of this huge... I mean, she represents many of us, but she's not elected. She doesn't have a movement behind her.
Could you set out, actually, how unfairly she is treated in some right-wing tabloids? And the fact that tabloids that some of us work for accuse her of being a Brexit blocker when all she is
Greg's
actually
got to give up working
doing
for the Daily Mail, I have told
is upholding the rule of law and the rights of Parliament.
So, June, where I join you in your girl crush is I fear we're going to have to part because I would imagine the next person of whom I speak you had a bit of a boy crush on.
Who?
I refer to Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, of course, I thought you might, who entered into the debate last week with an interview and also with the work of one of his commissions. And he said, quotes, "There is a wide open space in British politics. A politics we're now enthralled to Brexit. That space can be filled only by a strategy which recognises that there is no diversion possible from Brexit without addressing the grievances which gave rise to it. Here's the key. Paradoxically, we have to respect the referendum vote to change it." Well, again, 52%, that's what they want. What is Tony Blair trying to achieve? Your ex-boy crush or whatever, what's he trying to achieve?
Well, I think the thing is, what he's trying to achieve is to give people the opportunity to change their mind if they want to.
But you honestly think...
If they want to.
And he also talks about coming up with a new border arrangement and going back to the EU and then the EU allowing us a sort of associate membership. Why would they
I think
do that,
right
June?
now we need to look at all options where Brexit is concerned. I think we need to make sure all options are on the table and we find out what the best solution is.
But what's in it for the EU? If you see a recalcitrant member behave like this, then they come back, courtesy of Tony Blair or whoever is the honest broker...
What's in it for the EU is they didn't want us to leave in the first place.
Well, what is also
and actually, we're talking about Gina Miller here.
Yeah. What is also in it for the EU is that they do sell more goods to us than we sell to them.
Yeah.
So they'll want, in the end, some sort of proper trading agreement.
Precisely.
I mean, my issue with Tony Blair's intervention is that it seems to boil down to him saying, look, guys, the real problem isn't actually EU migration, it's Commonwealth immigration, and that this isn't going to be affected by that.
That's a good point.
And I mean, ironically, Gina Miller sometimes described as a first-generation immigrant, from a Commonwealth country.
Yeah.
I'm really uncomfortable with this idea that demonising immigrants from outside the EU is kind of the way to win people over to reversing Brexit, So in a way, to me, that's kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I'm not a great fan of Mr. Blair for
I know you're
all sorts of reasons. But I have to say, I listened to the interviews he gave last week and I agree with him on almost everything.
Yeah.
I thought that actually, if only we had Blair Mark One, Blair pre-Iraq.
Pre-Iraq, exactly.
You'd never have had a referendum. But more than that, even if he'd been leading the Labour Party at that time...
He could have swayed the country.
He could have swayed
the
country. It's just a tragedy that the only person who can effectively do that actually has got no credibility because of Iraq.
Well, it's funny, back to what Rachel and Afua were saying about the abuse that Gina has received. We've got a clip here of her talking about it.
Sexual, racial violence and threats and death threats, etc., that have come via phone calls, emails, letters to my office. My staff have been bombarded. My family have now been threatened. There's even a bounty on my head now.
I mean, it's terrible.
Tremendous interview. I mean, I've had the pleasure of interviewing her. She's a very, very bright woman, and as I say,
put her on the plinth and Nelson.
Yeah, I'm up for that. That works for me.
No, I don't think
I take Nelson down.
Take Nelson down. Replace him with Gina.
I was really hoping we would have a Nelson-free week, guys.
That space is held for Nigel Farage.
OK, everyone, that's enough about Gina Miller, because I want to say we really don't need to get our knickers in a twist about boys wearing skirts. Call me a liberal snowflake, and many
You're
have.
a liberal snowflake.
But for the life of me, I can't see what a school is doing wrong in allowing a small boy to wear a dress to school if he wants, and how it infringes any other child's rights, as Nigel and Sally Rowe, parents of another boy the same age, are arguing. Females of all ages choose between skirts and trousers. Jesus wore a nightie most of the time. Men of the cloth wear robes, and Scots insist on kilts. This Christian couple planning to sue a Church of England primary school should get over themselves. The school isn't imposing a new ideology. It's moving with the times. It's treating each child as an individual, not as a prisoner of gender. Live and let live. Or as Jesus said, suffer the little children. This couple's attitude strikes me as the antithesis of Christian.
Yep.
I think it's worth seeing what the father actually said.
Children often are experimenting on when they're younger, but they're not able to make those kind of deep, informed decisions. I mean, you're a 6-year-old. It's so young, and I sometimes wonder whether we as a society are beginning to embrace this. But actually, it's not a good thing. It's not a healthy thing.
He seems to be making 2 points there, of which one I agree with you when he says it's not a healthy thing at the end, but about the age. I mean, if you look up the figures, I mean, there are kids as young as 3 who are being referred to a clinic for this. How does a kid of 3 know or able to make the decision that actually that they're not sure about their sexuality?
I do think that small children can, of their own volition, want to experiment with gender. I don't think it's some agenda that society is kind of putting on them.
But do you think, or do you know that is a thing for life, or do you think it's just it's what little kids do?
Can I just say as well, because you mentioned that the clinic and the referrals have gone up. I think was it to a huge amount.
2,000.
In the vast majority of cases, they do not offer any medical treatment for children. In the vast majority. So it's not like these 3-year-olds are rocking up at clinic and being given gender reassignment drugs. It's not happening. They're just being talked to. They're being given a space to explore how they feel. And then in most cases, they're just getting on with their lives. So I think it's important to say that, because I do feel people get hysterical about this and think that we're kind of mass converting kids into transgender
Well, that's what that
identity.
father is implying, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my issue.
He's implying with him, he says the issue is, look, how can a child of this age make this sort of decision?
And I think that stems from a lack of understanding, personally.
Don't you think, Rachel, I completely agree with you. I think well said, so well said. And like I said, as a Christian, I think it's completely anti-Christian the way those parents are behaving. Also, this, if you look at it, I think it's harmless. So what if the kid wants to wear a dress? And actually, we're looking at this in the sort of British cultural context, because in certain parts of the world, young boys do wear loincloths or one-piece dresses. So if this child was being raised somewhere else, it would be normal for him to wear the kind of clothes he wants to wear here.
But
so I don't see what the problem is.
But that's because it's normal there.
But that's the point.
But it's fluid.
But this is...
So therefore, what do we decide is normal?
I don't know.
We're not talking about...
see this as abnormal.
No, but like Afua said, we're not talking about surgery. Surgery is a whole different issue. Clothes, who cares?
Nick, do you think that the parents, Nigel and Sally, are projecting their own prejudice onto their own son who's 6 and is growing up, as Greg has set out, in an era where we accept gender neutrality, we accept intersex, we accept transgender, and we have done since the Gender Equality Act of 2010.
I don't like the use of the word prejudice. We've mentioned the parents. Greg, you played us a little bit of Dad. Let's hear a little bit from Sally Rowe.
If you don't accept that this boy is a real girl, then you are deemed transphobic. If you don't say that this boy is a she, or use those things, then you're classed as transphobic, and that's imposed on us and on our children, and it goes totally against what we believe and our values. And we felt like we're being discriminated against. We're not being listened to. We're not being heard about what our beliefs are.
So I do feel that there should be respect for their beliefs. The Dad says, we as Christians need to address gender dysphoria with love and compassion, not in the sphere of a primary school environment. And I think we must respect... If that is what... It almost comes back to Afua's debate, actually. It might not be that that is what is current thought, but they have a right to think that way. And I have to put it to you, I know that you know I keep a comprehensive media library. I have all past editions of The Pledge, and I keep all your columns, which, appropriate for this debate, appear in the Mail on Sunday. And I've seen you write about the fact, and I've heard you say here on The Pledge, that growing up as you did with three fairly rambunctious, boisterous boys, you wanted to be a boy, so you could play cricket and rugby and whatever else you did and be a bloke. So you're arguing against yourself.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm completely arguing consistently.
No, because you can change. No, but
I went to school. I went to school, as I've said on the program, pretended to everyone I was a boy.
But subsequently, you have embraced the fact, and you are a lovely woman with children and yada yada.
That's a completely different issue.
Isn't that what this is about?
It is too young. It is too. Earlier this week, I went to the West End and I saw a show great fun called Kinky Boots. I don't know if any of you watched it.
Yes, it's a great show.
And it absolutely celebrates the fact that men want to dress as women, and I think that's great, fantastic. Yeah. When you reach puberty, 13, 14,
wrong,
something
Nick.
like
You're not looking at the evidence, I'm afraid.
I kind of find for Greg here, it's too young.
But no, you're not looking at the evidence, and, actually, Louis Theroux did a fantastic documentary where he interviewed very, very young children. You sort of think, you can't believe that children as young as 3 really are convinced they are born in the wrong body. But when you see these, you listen to them speak, you realise that's true. And I think where we are here is, what is more important? The feelings and the mental health of a 6-year-old boy who's very confused about his identity, or the feelings of a couple who've got 2 children in the same school.
Yet again is ignored.
I think the school is right to favoritise, if that's the right word, the child over these parents. And I hope the school wins its case.
Why is the role of faith continually diminished in this country? Bakers making cakes because they have a certain belief.
There is no biblical teaching that says boys have to wear trousers and girls have to wear skirts.
Jesus wore a dress, as you say.
They see it as part of their faith. Why does that have to be derided and diminished?
I'm not deriding or diminishing.
I hear what you're saying, Nick. When I listen to the parents, I mean, actually, to be fair, they're by no means the most unreasonable, bigoted
people.
They've tried to talk about being compassionate and everything. Where I think they're wrong is that they think it's kind of optional that you can have a private space where kids can talk about gender, and then in school they need to conform. I think that's wrong. I think that I don't think we should ignore the views of people of faith. I think it's important to engage with them. But the problem is there are really serious consequences. Rachel mentioned mental health.
Where is the Christian faith that says that...
Trans teens, 48% of trans people under the age of 26 have attempted suicide. That is vastly more than people who are not trans, and 30% said they had in the last year. So this is a real mental health issue, because in the past they haven't been given the space to be honest about how they feel.
The dad says this is something we as Christians need to address with love and compassion. He's doing anything but turning his back on it.
But Nick, I'm afraid
it's not for the primary.
Unless you show me in the scriptures where it says that girls have to be girls and boys have to be boys, I'm sorry, I am on the side of children who are trying to find their own identity.
It's a dress. So what?
It takes us back to the discussion we had last week about clothing and whether actually you just have gender-neutral clothing, because that would solve the issue.
Oh no,
for
I
them.
don't want that. I like dresses.
No,
I like to wear dresses.
Well, I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about you. I am talking about 6-year-olds. And I don't think you qualify.
I don't think we should have. What I feel is that, as we said last week, I don't think we should be told children should be banned from wearing X or Y. I think there should be. I agree with gender-neutral clothing, but I don't think you should tell girls they can't wear skirts and boys they can't wear dresses.
They're going to get anywhere anyway. Suing. I don't think. What are they? They're not going to get anywhere.
No. I mean, but it's like we've had so many of
these.
these cases about whether you can wear religious symbols at work and whether a Christian marriage counsellor has to marry a same-sex couple. You know, these, I think, is a bigger issue about what is the role of faith in modern public life. And I do think it is something that needs discussing. I'm not saying we should just shut people down. I think it's difficult because we are, as a society, moving towards a more fluid understanding of gender.
It is groupthink again, isn't it?
You know, we don't even have to look at other cultures. 100 years ago, they put little boys in dresses in this country. In fact, I'd be surprised if Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't put his kids in swaddling
in the christening
gowns.
I don't think he'd put them in swaddling gowns.
The nanny would do it. You know,
Yeah.
these things do change over time. That's nothing new. That's not some modern, loony, lefty groupthink, which I know exactly what you're thinking.
Well, panel, it's me next, and I want to tell you why the Prime Minister's pay is irrelevant. Last week, yet another group of top-level public service workers, university vice-chancellors, were told that they had to justify why they should earn more than the Prime Minister. Now, there are 3 reasons, I think, why the Prime Minister's comparison on salaries is ridiculous and should be ignored. First, the job of the Prime Minister is not one where there is an open market. If it was, many really talented people might be interested in applying. But only if they were offered the proper salary for the job, which I suspect would need to be a lot more than the $150,000 a year the Prime Minister currently gets. Secondly, the salary doesn't take into account the perks of the job, which include a very generous pension, lots of free meals, a company car with chauffeur and 2 grace and favour houses, one in a very prestigious part of London. And finally, and I believe most importantly, no one seems to take into account that although Prime Ministers earn $150,000 a year when they're actually doing the job, they can use the experience to earn a fortune afterwards. Just look at Tony Blair. I have no problem if the government wants to try to restrict wages at the top levels of the public sector, although in an international market like universities that might be unwise. But it's time to stop justifying this by using the ridiculous comparison with the Prime Minister's salary.
Greg, I agree.
Well, we might as well finish there then.
That's it. See you next week.
I'm going to be on my own again. Carry on, go on.
Got nothing to add.
You've got nothing to say.
You said it all there. I mean, spot on.
Okay.
How can you disagree?
I agree with that, but the bigger... But he just brushed off with a casual reference that it might be worth looking into what you pay highly paid public sector workers. I mean, that is the issue.
No, I'm saying government is perfectly entitled to say we're not going to pay public sector workers, but senior public sector workers above this level. What they're not entitled to do, and I've had politicians saying it to me, saying, why should you earn more than the Prime Minister? Well, the Prime Minister earns a fortune when he stops being Prime Minister.
Get that.
Well, you haven't done too badly, mate. I didn't have times for stuff. We're going to have a look round.
It strikes me, as former DG...
I don't take change.
I mean, I would be interested in your opinion as former DG, as former Vice-Chancellor of York.
Chancellor.
Sorry.
Yes, Chancellor. That was for nothing. You don't get paid as Chancellor. You just do it because it's fun.
OK, well, you've been in the senior leadership in your higher education space. Yeah. What do you think? Because when I read that the top 10 Vice-Chancellors at universities get up to £450,000 a year, I have to say, I was like... I understand the need to reward people at the top to attract talent, but that is a lot of taxpayers' money. And given that we are in an era where public sector workers, even with the 1% pay increase that was announced this week, I mean, it's frankly pretty insulting because it's still a pay cut in real terms. We do need to talk about what we pay people in the public sector.
I agree entirely that we need to talk about what we pay people in the public sector. I think the 1% that has gone on for years now, having had 2% 2 years when it was frozen to start with, is ridiculous. And you're now finding it in all sorts of areas that you can't employ people. And to believe that you're now going to be able to get prison officers because you're giving them 1 3/4% is a joke.
On that note, you've got these incredibly highly paid people at one end of the spectrum, and then hundreds of thousands of public sector workers near breaking point.
Except the people you're often getting to do these jobs, look at what they earn outside. I mean, I sometimes think the media doesn't understand quite how much money some people are actually earning in this country. Millions and millions and millions. And if we're going to do something about that, then we have to look at the whole way we organise society. I mean, in the post-Thatcher era, we went to a free market. What they're saying is in certain areas you can't have a free market because you can't earn more than the Prime Minister. Well, that's daft, just to say that. Should the Vice-Chancellor at Oxford earn $350,000 a year?
I don't have a problem with it.
She came from... she's in a market where this is one of the top universities in the world, and if you went to America to do that job, you would earn vastly more than that.
But we're not in America.
No, I agree with you.
I like the benchmark of using the Prime Minister's pay. Why? Because it is the most brutal job and you're judged on results. And that, for me, is the problem, a little bit supporting what Afua said, that in some instances... By the way, a woman who's running Oxford University, I think it was just last week voted the #1 university in the world, she probably earns that 350. Good luck to her. But some of the Vice-Chancellors, and he's not here to defend himself, so it's unfair to say, but is running a failing university and is earning somewhere in the region of £300,000 a year. Yeah. That is absurd. And let's just look at what was said that brought this conversation to a point. There's another fellow called Johnson. This is Joe Johnson, Minister for Universities and Science. I've heard in recent days one prominent Vice-Chancellor noting she was paid less than footballers or bankers. If university managers want those kinds of wages, they are simply in the wrong business. In that, a lot of that money comes from kids going through the system. I think the minister's on
this. A lot of that money comes from foreign students as well.
Her comparison with footballers was daft, because football is a particular sort of talent. We've always paid entertainers talent. What will be an interesting comparison is, say, the people who run Premier League football clubs. And you'll discover that most of them are on over $1 million, some of them on $2 million. For what is a fairly easy job, in all honesty.
Greg, I think you made a mistake in what you've said, if you forgive me, which is that you said we're in a open market, and we're not, because we have public sector pay and we have private sector pay, and therefore there's not a level playing field. And having agreed with you at the beginning, I actually now think Nick's got a point, and we need that benchmark, given that we're trying to stratify.
You haven't been well this week. I know.
And no, wait. The university sector is not part of the free market, and therefore I agree that Dame Louise Richardson, who runs the top educational university in the world, probably earns every penny of her $350K, and if she was running Harvard, she'd probably be on a 7-figure salary.
Should be on 4 times that.
But, what we have to see is that, Afua's right, there is incredible inequality in pay. And this is what we need to look at.
But as a society, we need to look at that. Yeah. And if we're seriously going to do something,
but we're not in a free market, and that's the problem. Given we're not, and some people are being paid out of the public purse, we need to have a sense of what somebody who's doing a very important job should be paid out of the public purse.
I agree with that. That's true. All I'm saying is, let's stop this guff about saying they earn more or less than the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister earns a fortune when he finishes.
So
you'd be Prime Minister for 4 years and you probably earn an extra $500,000 a year.
And the Prime Minister doesn't
forever.
have to spend a penny of her own money while she's Prime Minister. Everything is covered.
Responsibility. Is there a better job? You take a country to, or you avoid war. You take a country in or out of you.
I am not in any way...
That's an argument for paying the Prime Minister much
more.
I
don't disagree with that.
I
don't disagree with that.
I mean, our democracy is in problems because actually we pay so low. Yeah. We get what you pay for.
Well, the whole MP's expenses thing was that MPs are paid such a derisory salary, really, compared to what they could be earning doing something else, that they were making it up by doing all kinds of creative expenses accounting. And I think it would be better to just be transparent, pay them what they should pay. And the same with the Prime Minister.
Let's just get it out there.
Pay the Prime Minister symbolically what the job is worth.
An MP, £74,962. That's
but they've had a pay rise. They've had a pay rise. But it was much less than that when the expenses scandal broke.
A lot of people watching that would say, wow, 75k.
But a lot of people
talking about what they command in the market.
And that's what MPs find difficult, because they're not living that life. They live a different sort of life, which requires them to spend quite a lot of money and the rest of it. I would halve the number of MPs and double their money.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Great idea.
Yeah,
and what's interesting is
Yeah.
you look around the world, I think you talked about this, the President of the United States would earn $400,000 to help you. That's just over £300,000. President Trump, however, takes a salary of just $1, but that gives you an idea, $300. And in fact, it's
well,
more...
that's because he has made a bit of money in
no. But just so the viewers get
tax records.
And how much does it cost us for him to go tomorrow?
On the Aussie PM, 320,000 per year, which speaks to what you were saying.
But that dollar thing, that's still not quite sure because he hasn't actually allocated the money to charity yet, wasn't it?
That's the problem. It as an example to support what Greg was saying. Why did I say Trump? I should have stayed with Turnbull in Australia. I'd have done a lot better.
but I mean, the trouble is, as soon as you suggest a proper increase for MPs or for the Prime Minister...
There's public uproar.
Led by your friends in the Daily Mail,
yes, they are friends.
They absolutely go nuts about it. No one says, what does Dacre earn as the editor of the Daily Mail?
What if they cut the half, though? What if you said half the MPs? I think then that would gain a bit of support.
I think so.
We're not going to spend any more money, but we're going to have a more...
He says we only argue and never come up with solutions.
OK,
right, it's my turn this week to choose our straight talker. Let's see if I can cause as much controversy as you, Rachel. Now, the person I've chosen is 23 years old. She's an Ivy League graduate, headed, as they say in the US, to law school. And she's also now Miss America 2018. During the interview, which incidentally comes after the swimsuit and talent contest, she was asked about President Trump's decision to withdraw from the Paris climate change deal. And this is what she said. Whether you believe it or not, we need to be at that negotiation table. And I just think it's a bad decision on behalf of the United States. And in case that wasn't enough, she even took the time to explain her comments after the event.
I think my onstage question answer was just my personal opinion. I think everyone has a right to think what they want. Just the one thing is, it's important to have a spot at the negotiation table. And this isn't necessarily does climate change exist or not, but rather the fact that we're going to keep our Earth clean for the future generations.
So for all that, Karaman, you are this week's straight talker. Touché, Jacob.
I'm laughing that she actually
it's kind of surreal to be making the point with
still on.
I know.
No, but why would an Ivy League graduate become a beauty queen? That's what I can't
Why not? Why not?
Oh.
I think this is going to take a long time.
Knock him out of this. Let these two go.
Does it not grate you, Jean? Rachel, what do you think?
Why not? I just remember the days when beauty queens said that they wanted to travel the world and what was it? And look up, help babies.
When I was running ITV, London Weekend Television, a long time ago, I campaigned to take the beauty contest off the television because it was such a sexist concept, and I can't get over that prejudice that goes back 30 years.
Isn't that how Trump made his money? All
Miss Universe.
Was that one of Trump's?
I mean, I would rather that beauty queens use their platform to make good political points.
I'd rather
they weren't
beauty queens.
They were given a platform without
she's
wearing a
probably not
swimsuit.
going to have any student debt. She's going to use that beauty queen money to pay for her degree. So good on her.
I'd rather you two have that row about the Ivy League. Can we go back to that? I was going to enjoy that. That was really good.
All right, that's it for this week, I'm afraid. We're back next Thursday. Really?